sometimes be just a 4/6 body that gets there. So let's see. It is going to be even Paladin for Fairley, and the Warlock once again for AA.
And this is a really interesting matchup in terms of the discussion that goes on around it, because against the control lock, I think it's probably decided now that even Paladin is not in a great spot. You often don't get there because they just curve out and often beat you on board in the early turns with the likes of Doomsayer and Plated Beetle. And then in the later stages of the game, the fact they can consistently get Void Lords back with Gul'dan or get it with the Lackey is generally a little bit too much delay for the Paladin to deal with. But I've seen a lot of players argue that against Q-blocks in particular, or the general Warlock strategies, that even Paladin can get it done if you build it in the right way with a nice aggressive late game.
And Fairley does have a decent late game. He's running a copy of Crystal Lion, which could be considered late game, but could be considered early game since he's running double Dry Gulch Jailer. He does only have one copy of Equality, which could be a detriment to him because that's one of the tools that helps you get through boards later in the game. Even if it's just a board full of Boardwalkers, if you Equality Avenging Wrath, that allows you to push through your minions that you otherwise wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue in the scheme of things, in the way that even Paladin can be built, this is not a particularly anti-Warlock version, only running one Ooze. It hasn't got cards like Valanir in there that sometimes is used to get a bit more reach against Warlock, or Dino Size, like we see from Pheno and Ball Control. But still, maybe in a decent spot here, as, you know, 83650 has not necessarily found himself with the best hand. He's got some good anti-aggro options, but if Fairley just starts hitting his opponent with Blessing of Kings, there's not too much answer at the moment for Fairley, at least in the immediate term.
Yeah, he was able to pick up Tar Creeper from the Stonehill Defender, which is a great card to have because it could act as a way to soften up the board for Hellfire in the later turns. Because if it does absorb a hit from the Blessing of King Silverhander crew, that means that Hellfire is just going to be able to clear off the board a lot more of the time. And now Fairley going into a turn where Hellfire is still a possibility. Do you have to play Call to Arms? Do you check with something smaller first?
Yeah, it really doesn't feel... I mean, okay, I was going to say it doesn't feel great to play Call to Arms. You're playing Call to Arms. It can only ever feel so bad to play it, because even if it is cleared, you've thinned your deck of 3 of your 2-drops, so you're more likely to get in those heavy cards later on. But I was saying, I think I actually quite like the Stegodon here, because you can get some really nice adaptations here, like plus health, Divine Shield, I don't know, maybe even Wind Fury, just to get some extra attack in these early turns.
And it just ensures that he's going to leave something behind if an AoE clear comes out, or if Hellfire specifically comes out. But yeah, going back to your Call to Arms point, if your Call to Arms gets Hellfire, oh no, we traded 1 for 1.
That's a good point. That's a good way of looking at it. And you very possibly end up with the way that he's built his deck list with a bunch of Silverhand Recruits in your hand, because you've got the Dry Gulch Jailer in there, as well as Loot Hoarders. So kind of a little version that runs powerful Death Rattles in the early slot, so that you're less vulnerable to those board clears.
Well, let's see what AA is going to decide to do. Fairley made this board really awkward with his Acidic Swamp Boost trade into the Kobold Librarian.
Pretty cute play.
Yeah. I think we have very different definitions of the word cute.
What, a slime smacking into a kobold?
Yeah.
And it does mean that AA is unable to utilize his Hellfire here, which in a way isn't necessarily too bad for him, because it's obviously one of the best cards in this matchup. He wants to save it for the best possible scenario. But Spellstone can be a pretty good card in this matchup. That's now been used on a 5/1 instead of something like a Crystal Lion or something with Blessing of Kings thrown on it.
This might sound crazy, but what do you think of this play? Call to Arms.
Wait for it.
Love it.
Great play. And this is exactly what I was saying. These powerful Death Rattles mean, even in kind of the worst case scenario, I'm doing air quotes here, which they may not be able to tell at home, it's not that bad. You still end up with a full hand.
What did you say?
I'm doing air quotes.
Oh. I thought you said Equarts.
Equarts.
I thought that was some cool new hip.
Yeah, it's English slang. Yeah, mate, you want some Equarts?
I want to go around to the pub. Get some Equarts.
Hello, Ari.
Reporting for duty.
And so now Bailey's put himself in the position which, you know, you really want to be in as the even paladin. This is kind of the best spot you're in, where you've done a decent job in the early game, you got some early damage in, and now you follow up with the burst cards, True Silver, Avenging Wrath, even Lich King to an extent, if it can find Death Coil or Death and Decay. You're pushing forward some real damage, even through a Void Lord. And even if a Void Lord does come down, there's still the Spellbreaker as well.
Yeah, Lord Godfrey is going to ruin that for everybody, though. As he most certainly all of the time does.
Every single time, yeah. But for the moment, at least, I still quite like Fairley's position. He can put up a decent board on this turn, a good amount of damage with the second swing of the True Silver, follow up with Avenging Wrath if he's got lethal, Lich King if he doesn't. It's a very nice spot indeed, especially because he's going into turn 8, which is a very weak turn generally for the Warlocks.
Yeah. But A8 still does have a lot of anti-aggro tools.
Very good point.
Ton of removal left, has Shroom Brewer to heal up, Stonehill Defender to find even more taunts to put in the way, and just absorb some damage itself. Played a Beetle. Still think A8's in a good position. It's going to be hard for Philly to just push enough damage through. Those are pretty poor options. Forward Homunculus is going to be the choice. It buffs Spellstone, but that's about the only benefit that it really has, I guess. Because of it, it's overstated for its cost, but
yeah. And so for both players here, they need to be, it's the real, you know, push and pull of the aggro or mid-range versus control decks, where Fairley needs to be thinking about what removal his opponent has and play his best around that, whereas A8 has to be thinking about what threats his opponent has and meter out his removal as best as possible. And considering all of that, I like the Lich King here, because if your opponent has to use a Twisting Nether here to clear it off, which is one of their strongest options, you're feeling pretty good, and you're still making them have that card. There's not too many ways to deal with this effectively.
yeah. He Twisting Nose and plays nothing. Fairley can just play an Avenging Wrath.
That would be pretty good.
Deal 8 points of damage directly to his dome piece.
Yeah, this does feel a little bit stronger given A8's option. He even gets to keep the Shroom Brewer alive. But again, still for Fairley, just a little bit mana short from setting up a truly threatening board. Because if he can just get a few of these 1/1s to stick and then go Anti-Magic Shell, Light Fuse Stegodon, that's a crazily powerful turn. And this might be the way that he sets that up, with a quality Avenging Wrath, clears the board, damage to phase, can even set up a 1/1 behind that, which is pretty relevant here, just for that extra push.
Yeah. Very much so. It's about spacing out his reload. Still, this deck just runs a ton of removal.
Yeah.
We're talking the Voodoo Dolls, Double Defile, Double Hellfire, Lord Godfrey, Twisting Nether.
And he's drawn pretty much all of it, like 2 Hellfires, Godfrey, Defile, Twisting Nether, and 2 Void Lords as well. Like, this was a pretty stellar hand for A8 3650, to be honest.
Yeah, and Philly still has a chance.
Yeah.
Same with the power level of the deck.
Move quickly.
Ooh.
Reporting for duty. Reporting for duty. Reporting for duty.
This is interesting.
So clearly thinking here, I guess, that an even or clear board state is not good enough for him at the moment, or at the very least would rather have these Avenging Wraths go all face rather than clear into some minions on the board. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure that I agree. This is so likely to be cleared on board. Like, he'd have to get some very specific adaptations here to not have a board that's just cleared off with the likes of plus health, divine shield, maybe stealth, something like that. And even then, there's still a respectable chance that his board gets cleared.
Philly can actually reload with Spellbreaker, Anti-Magic Shell next turn to try and push some damage.
And again, like we mentioned many times, he just needs to try and put himself in a position where Avenging Wrath can close things out, because I think he's starting to realize in this position, board control, he's starting to lose it. If his opponent has another Void Lord or Gul'dan, something like that, and it will just be irreparably lost in this scenario.
If he silences and pushes 6 by playing Anti-Magic Shell, and it's forced to Twisting Nether next turn,
Reporting for duty.
Avenging Wrath would be 1 damage off.
And I guess that's probably what Fairley is realizing, that, you know, even if his opponent has Hellfire, which was another board play here, he would still end up just delivering lethal on the following turn. And in this scenario, the Doomsayer kind of makes it less likely for him to be able to deliver lethal on this turn. But he can just clear it off, I suppose, with Hero Power Scalehide Tarim. It does put him ahead on board. But he's just trading off the Scalehide then. But if he passes and his opponent plays Void Lord or Gul'dan, that's kind of just it.
Yeah. But could Terran be used post Void Lord? If he predicts that the second one could be in the hand to try and get through it much easier. But it looks like he is going to go with the Terran play. Understands that, hey, if I have minions on the board and attack into stuff, and my opponent doesn't have Void Lord in his hand,
Right.
then it's likely that I'll have lethal next turn with 8 damage Avenging Wrath, plus a 2 damage Consecration, and some minions to be able to attack with. So, also, there's a second Spellbreaker in the deck of Fairley.
Which, again, from A8's perspective, would not deliver lethal on the spot, which is why I think he's going for the Void Lord now, rather than at a later point. And not quite the ability to get a lethal with Avenging Wrath, or I suppose in the absolute perfect scenario, it could occur. But Fairley's still trying to wrestle back that board control he so desperately needs.
That is lethal damage, because the
Death Rattle doesn't
proc. A nice spot by Fairley. And he's going to take a 2-0 lead in the series. That was beautiful play. Yeah, because the Death Rattle from the Void Lord doesn't happen until the effect from Avenging Wrath is fully resolved.
Right.
So he realized that as long as the total health on the board between the hero and the minions is 8, then I have lethal damage. So very nicely done.